Saturn V rose through the Florida sky with the confidence of a machine doing exactly what it had been built to do. Flames stretched beneath it. The launch tower fell away. Millions of pounds of hardware climbed toward the moon. For the astronauts aboard Apollo 12, the most dangerous part of the mission was already underway. For the people watching from Earth, it looked routine. The launch was clean. The rocket was performing as expected. A moon mission was in motion. Above the launch site, storm clouds waited. The rocket continued upward. Then a bolt of lightning struck. For an instant, the enormous vehicle seemed to disappear inside the flash. The Saturn V kept climbing. A few seconds later, another strike followed. Nothing about the rocket's movement suggested disaster. It was still accelerating. It was still heading towards space. But inside Mission Control, something else was happening. Telemetry screens began filling with impossible information. Warning lights appeared. Measurements that had been stable moments earlier suddenly made no sense. Controllers watched values jump, vanish, and contradict one another. The spacecraft had barely left Earth, and already the people responsible for understanding it could no longer trust what they were seeing. The most obvious explanation felt convincing. Lightning had struck the vehicle. Now the spacecraft was failing. The evidence seemed to support it. Multiple systems appeared affected. Readings arrived in chaotic patterns. The command module showed warning indications across different areas. The launch had transformed from a routine ascent into a mission-threatening emergency. Yet even inside the confusion, something refused to fit. The spacecraft continued flying. Some behaviors remained strangely normal. The telemetry looked catastrophic. The spacecraft itself looked less certain. That contradiction mattered. Because if the vehicle had truly suffered massive physical damage, the data should have been telling a clear story of destruction. Instead, the data itself appeared broken. The distinction was subtle, and every second made it harder to recognize. Apollo 12 was still moving away from Earth. The mission clock was advancing. Opportunities available now would not remain available forever. Mission Control needed understanding before it needed solutions. But understanding was exactly what had disappeared. Across rows of consoles, controllers searched through streams of distorted information. Numbers flickered. Signals arrived stripped of meaning. The problem was no longer simply whether the spacecraft had survived. The problem was whether anyone could still determine what reality looked like. The recovery window had begun to shrink. As long as the telemetry remained incomprehensible, every decision carried uncertainty. The spacecraft might be healthy. The spacecraft might be damaged. The spacecraft might be somewhere in between. The longer that uncertainty lasted, the less useful any eventual answer would become. The pressure was no longer centered on the lightning strike. It was centered on recognition. Somewhere inside the noise, a pattern either existed or it did not. Somebody needed to see it before the opportunity disappeared. Then, at one console, a memory surfaced. Not a new discovery, not a breakthrough calculation, a memory. Years earlier, during simulations, a rarely encountered electrical condition had produced a strange collection of symptoms. Most people never saw it. Most people never needed it. It belonged to a procedure so unusual that it sat near the edges of operational memory. Yet the pattern unfolding across the screens looked familiar. One controller believed he had seen it before. The spacecraft itself remained enormous. A moon mission remained enormous. But the possible solution pointed towards something surprisingly small. A switch? The contrast bordered on absurd. Thousands of people had contributed to the mission. The most powerful rocket ever launched was carrying human beings toward another world. And now the entire situation appeared to hinge on whether a nearly forgotten switch setting still mattered. The recommendation moved through mission control. Transmit the procedure. Have the crew change the switch. Few people understood exactly why it would work. That was not the immediate concern. The question was simpler. Would it reveal reality? Or would it confirm that the spacecraft was truly failing? The command reached the astronauts. The switch was moved. For a moment, nothing visible changed. Then the telemetry returned. Not gradually, not piece by piece. The chaos vanished. The streams of meaningless information snapped back into recognizable patterns. Suddenly, the spacecraft could be understood again. Controllers could see what systems were actually doing. Measurements aligned. Signals made sense. The impossible flood of contradictions disappeared. The room had not recovered the spacecraft. The room had recovered its ability to understand the spacecraft. And that realization changed the story. Only minutes earlier, the lightning strike appeared to have crippled a moon mission. The evidence seemed overwhelming. Warning lights, confused readings, system-wide abnormalities. Yet if catastrophic damage had truly been the central problem, one switch would never have transformed the situation. The contradiction finally resolved itself. The spacecraft had not been failing in the way everyone feared. Understanding had been failing. The greatest threat was not the physical strike alone. It was the possibility that the correct response would remain unrecognized until it lost value. Apollo 12 continued toward the moon. The launch survived. The mission survived. But the meaning of the event changed. The story did not end as a tale of engineering overcoming failure. It became something more specific, more human. Preparation had created knowledge. Knowledge had created possibility. But possibility remained useless until the exact moment someone recognized it. The image that remains is not the lightning bolt. It is the scale mismatch. A tiny switch inside a spacecraft. A moon mission crossing space. One almost unimaginably large. One almost forgettably small. Between them sat a brief window of opportunity that was steadily disappearing. The mission survived because that window closed one moment too late. And because one person remembered the right switch before remembering it no longer mattered,